The trust data revolution is here. Data governance is now not only possible, it's plausible, feasible, and can be done quite effectively with the right tools and technology. This can help organizations unleash tremendous analytical insights to change their business and to change our lives. Learn more in this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Yours truly, Eric Cavanaugh here, and I'm excited for this conversation today, folks. We have a couple of senior level executives from big, interesting companies who know all about data. They're in charge of dealing with data at their organizations, and it's always fun to talk to the end users, the people who are out there using the technology, trying to improve their operations with analytics. We'll talk about trusted data, the trust data revolution. This is a preview of the Airside conference coming up in New York City next week. Hop online to Airside.Live for more information. Feel free to register to watch virtually or come on down in attendance. And if you want to attend live, send me an email at info@dmradio.biz. I could probably get you a discount or maybe even a free pass, maybe. So send me an email, let me know. Analytic governance, we were talking in the pre-show here. We'll be talking here to Eric Johnson from Momentive, formerly SurveyMonkey, and Gregor, Sewinksi from Payability. In just a moment, they'll both be speakers at the show. But we were talking about data governance and how a number of years ago, let's say 10 years ago, if you mentioned anything about data governance, people would run for the hills. Boy, they would suddenly have a meeting, they would hang up, they would be too busy to talk to you. No one wanted anything to do with data governance because, simply put, they thought, look, I'm fighting hard to get what data I want. I don't want someone standing in my way, preventing me from getting it. I don't want to have to answer questions about why I want to use this data. But how things have changed. Now governance is a huge topic, and I think it's part and parcel to a number of very significant mega trends in the marketplace, one of which is cloud, one of which is the fact that we have all these new sources of data that we can leverage. One of them is the fact that the analytics industry is really mature these days. We've come a very long way in the last 5-10 years, and now analytics drives the information economy. If you look at all of the cool new companies, certainly all the ones that are going public, they all have some data science play. They are all doing some really interesting things with data at scale. They're identifying opportunities, they're optimizing processes, and really in a lot of cases, it's not just some sort of streamlined process, it's collapsed processes. Now we're now able to do things in milliseconds instead of minutes or hours or days or even weeks. So the game has changed fundamentally. We have companies like Snowflake that have blown the doors off of how we think about cloud data warehousing, for example, and all these different analytics vendors. But the question is, how can you be responsible with your data? How can you open the door and let your analysts jump in and analyze data, but do so in a responsible way? Well, it used to be that you could control data at the access level, meaning in the database somewhere. So that's just basically who gets credentials to hit that database. Or you could control it at the app level, which is also a decent way, but you couldn't do anything in the middle. And I think that's where things have really changed. And there are lots of reasons for that, but let's go ahead and learn from our guests on the show today. Let's bring in Eric Johnson from Momentive.ai, used to be called SurveyMonkey. Eric, welcome to the show. And tell us about your journey for data governance and how things have changed for you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for having me. I think you said a little bit at the beginning of the intro there, this journey has been, I kind of came and was kind of born in the world of data, working for some fairly large data companies that really specialize in providing those tools and technologies. And I can recall vividly being, running our data program internally and trying to get executives to come to the table to talk about things like data governance and how we couldn't get them to come to the meeting. It just wasn't something that was top of mind. I think people understood it, but it was almost it was a bit of a dirty word. And now as sort of the data space has started to evolve, and I think people have now started to really truly appreciate how valuable and how important data is for not only their like their specific success, and data, making a case with data is seen more and more is sort of how people get decisions made in a lot of organizations. So being very data driven is now coming to fruition. But just also as a company as a whole, companies that are leveraging data and managing that data successfully are the ones that in many cases are sort of leading their areas of expertise, leading their sort of areas of business. And so I think that evolution has been really interesting, and I think it's happened in a pretty short time frame. We're not talking about decades and decades. We're talking about very much less than the last 10 years. You've gone from governance being that dirty word to being now very much top of mind, more so than ever before. And I think it's only going to continue to become more and more important, especially as you start looking at government regulations going on around the world. When you're starting to, even in the United States, we started with things like CCPA, which is essentially like the GDPR for California. I think what's starting to happen, we're going to see more and more of that going on across the United States, probably even something at the federal level. And what we start to see in Europe is just continuing tightening of regulations and requirements for managing data. So it sort of kind of falls under this governance umbrella for me. And so I think companies are going to get smarter and smarter, and I think the technologies are going to get better and better, and I think it's going to become a real important component of any organization sort of data program. So it's been a fun journey to watch in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, it really is. It's amazing how much things have changed. And I think you also touched on something else, which is that there are so many more people whose jobs now rely heavily on not just data, but analysis, analyzing the data, understanding what's happened. If you think about how many more sources of information we can pull in, it's mind-blowing. I mean, really, it's how many ever sources you can get access to and fit into some sort of decent model that doesn't get too complicated and turn into Play-Doh gray, as I like to call it sometimes. But you can get signal from so many different places. And so now, and I think you probably would agree with this, once you run your day-to-day operations leveraging analytics as a core component of what you do, you can't go back. I mean, you just want more, and the appetite increases. So it basically ushers in this appreciation for analysis, this appreciation for data and quality data, and you can't go back in time. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a one-way road, right? You don't go back to the chaos of the days when data was one of those things that companies and organizations sort of, I don't know if they paid too much attention to. There definitely was always this kind of question on ownership. Now I think just the opposite. There's an never-ending demand for more data, because I think people are starting to appreciate the more data you have, quality data you have, in a way that sort of is brought together and normalized. All of a sudden you can start to see and identify opportunities that maybe you never saw before. So I think there's this growing, and I would say pretty fast growing appetite for more and more data, which is sort of helping to drive this I think an explosion. I'd call it an explosion of technologies and innovation around data. The snowflakes of the world are just the beginning. I mean, you can look across every aspect of a data program now. There's innovative technology showing up all over the place, and I feel like once a week I'm talking to some new recently launched venture-backed company that has this really innovative way to handle data. So there's a lot of money being thrown into it. I think the appetite from the business is only growing every day, and I agree with you. This is not something that we're going to ever go back to where we were before, where maybe people were sort of dabbling with data. I think now people see data, no matter what department you're in. Name a function, name a department, there's a hunger for more data.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the other side of the equation here is agility. And agility, I think, is really the number one factor, well, probably tied with morale, I would say, for organizations. The more agile you can be and the higher your morale, the better off you're going to do. And that agility requires us to take a hard look at processes and the old ways. I was joking about analytics, it was very manual. Someone was in charge, a director of IT, for example, said, okay, I think Eric gets the right to access this data. That was a manual process. You cannot have a process that manual anymore. It has to be dynamic. It has to be automated to some extent. The question is, where do you automate? How do you automate? How do you track that? I mean, one of the things I love about cloud is that I think we really baked into cloud computing and cloud architecture a lot of the best practices that we learned in 40 years of on-prem. And so all this metadata is just dynamically captured. Who logged in when, what did they touch, where did they go? That's your audit trail, which is really important when things go wrong. So we go, okay, well, who went in and did this? Aha, we found it, it's you. Please don't do that again. That's a whole different world now than what we had in the on-prem world. It was much harder to kind of track things down and to do the audit trail. What do you think, Eric?
Oh, absolutely. The ability to track where people are going, what they're doing, but also just the tooling has gotten better and better around data lineage. Where did this data come from? Where is it going? Right. Data reliability is this whole new space that's showing up now, where there's companies out there that are providing these really, really rich capabilities around monitoring your data from a quality perspective. Is it fitting within these tolerances? And if it's not, alerting you and then telling you, maybe what actually went wrong. I mean, one of the biggest challenges in any data program has always been around the, can I trust this data? Right. And the more sources you bring in, the more complexity you add, higher chance of data that may not be accurate, maybe has something that is not trusted. And the fastest way to ruin a data program is to have data that people can't trust. It's sort of it is the underpinning value of a data program. And so I think, like what you said, like the auditability, it's not just the users, but I think we're getting really good at auditability of the data. Like, where's it coming from? Where's it going? Is it in the right tolerances? Is it data that needs to be anonymized or somehow redacted? The ability to manage, like we're talking about governance is a whole thing, but just the whole process of managing that data, the technology has helped us to do it in a much more intelligent way than we used to, which was writing lots of scripts and a lot of manual work. And it was messy and hard. And so I think it contributes to what you're talking about, this whole thing about agility. And by the way, people's expectations have changed too, Eric.
That's right.
A few years ago, it was like, get me the data when you can. And, then you'd go through this painful process of pulling the data into a data warehouse, on-prem, and then you'd build the BI tool on top of it, and you'd have a lot of work in constructing the right dashboard and the right security controls. And like, you would go through this painful exercise, and it would take more time than it really should. Now people are expecting data almost instantaneously. It's like, right. I need the data this week. It used to be, I need this data sometime this quarter. So the ability to turn that data over to your business partners in a way that they can access it quickly, and hopefully even with some intelligence attached to it, the cycle time has literally gone from months to days or hours sometimes. So I think that agility is a really interesting point that's probably worth continuing to poke at a little bit. Like, what does that agility look like, and what as data professionals, what are some things we need to start doing better to make sure that we're keeping up? Because you know what happens if you don't keep up? People will go start do it themselves. Technology's gotten good enough now and easy enough for many times, even folks in the business, to go and start building their own data programs, which is a whole different conversation, right? Which is which causes lots of issues.
Let's bring in Gregor Sewinski from Payability to kind of comment on some of that stuff. Gregor, you've heard us talking about these challenges and how things are changing. From your perspective, how big a deal is data governance now, and how much has the situation changed in the last 5 years?
Yes, exactly. So I have similar views. We at Payability have pretty much we are 100% in cloud for both business applications and our system that we built. So this and I've been with Payability for about 5 years, so I remember that in the early days when I started, there was very little attention to any of these topics. The data in general was pretty much understood as spreadsheet and Google Sheets and reports done in SQL. And that was like at the time the way to do it. Now I agree with what Eric said. Is like everybody wants to have instant access to all the data, and the business users basically expect that this data is fresh and it can be trusted. So because they don't want to. We went through the process of these data projects. Like, hey, I would like to build this report, this dashboard. And it would be, you would file a ticket, go into a queue, then somebody would build it. But nobody has like time and patience to wait for this now. So it needs to be like this is basically a reality of what business requires. So the challenge with this is obviously it goes so fast that you also have to make sure that we provide appropriate security and governance, like make sure that PII doesn't leak, make sure that doesn't get any unauthorized access. And so you can't do what you guys mentioned, go to some data officer and say like, hey, I would like to access to our, Q1 financial data. If this doesn't happen, you have to basically in real time detect something's wrong and block access. So this is where I see the biggest revolution in the tools that are now showing up on the market to basically do this in real time.
Yeah, the coding, scripting. A lot of times people will, in the old fashioned, especially in the data center world, if you wanted something done quickly and you knew how to code, if you were on that team, you could just patch something together and you're fine. But that kind of scripting doesn't scale. And if that person leaves, then, knowing who did what at which point in time was kind of a difficult thing to do. And I think that now that we do have all these opportunities, all these different technologies we can bring to bear that were purpose built for these particular use cases, it's just a different game now. We talk a lot in our industry in the data world about the modern data stack, which is quite fascinating because you have whole projects, open source projects that are focused on building out some part of what the database used to do. And not the databases are going away, they're always going to be here. But you have this whole stack building out now. And I think it's really kind of fascinating to see how some organizations are realigning themselves and realigning their technology stacks to be able to leverage data at scale. And that's, I think, the key word, Gregor. Maybe if you can comment on this, then I'll bring Eric back in. People need to understand that when something scales out, the rules change. You cannot manually deal with a scale out kind of infrastructure. You have to find ways to automate. You have to find ways to manage these environments. What do you think about the fact that scale out has fundamentally changed technology?
Yeah, that's especially like my motto here is to do a lot with a little because we have a limited resources, but the data is growing and basically coming in very fast. So I think that the only way to manage this is to find the right tools, and there are the technology and innovation around this is basically growing very fast. So if you use outdated tools, you just have to replace them with something more efficient. But even I give this example with ETL. ETL used to be the process that you would have to say like, well, you get some data, you need to transform it in order to use for analytics. Now there are tools that you can basically, the analyst can go and do their own ETL in seconds, and it becomes like a real-time pipeline. So I've seen these tools introduced in production, and people use it and they're happy. So it is something I could not even imagine like a year or two ago.
Yeah, wild. Yeah, I mean, that's a significant change too. And self-service, we should talk about self-service as a goal, as the vision. You want as much self-service as you can get, so long as you have the governance in place. I did some interviews last week in Vegas at a conference, and one of the CIOs, who has a really good sense of humor, was joking about the tickets that he gets, the calls that he gets. People, I want this data, I want that data, I want this tech, I want that tech, all day. You can imagine it's a CIO. And they do enable self-service. And he says sometimes it gets a little goofy. And the way he described it cracked me up. He basically paraphrased what someone came to him and said, "Oh, hey, I dug up this stupidity. How can we advance this?" He's like, "We won't. We won't advance that. Look, you found some oddity out there in the data landscape that is not the norm, that is not a trend, it is not a pattern. So you do have to watch out for the governance side. You want people playing around, but within certain boundaries, right, Eric Johnson?"
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that's what a lot of this technology has allowed us to do, right? as Gregor was talking about, the tech has sort of supported this ability to very quickly build the infrastructure, make sure the data is trusted, put the right layer of controls in there, so that you put good guardrails in place for people so they don't hurt themselves. You give them kind of a single source of the truth, so that when they're pulling data and they're looking at data, at least they're all working off the same data. Like that was always, those are some of the those were always things that were really hard to just get to that place,
right?
Historically. Right. I think the technology now has allowed us to get there. I think there's a whole world of change management that I think many data programs still have to learn to do better. The change management, the soft skills, it has nothing to do sometimes with the technology. The technology is is there. Now it's getting to that point. And then now you're talking about the self-serve. It's here, it's ready. I think it's, again, educating the business stakeholders, the executives, the functions that support some of these executives to help themselves. And it's amazing. I've done this at a number of times where we've created these kind of data champion functions, basically, where we grab key stakeholders from different parts of the business that have a very kind of data oriented role. A lot of times it's ops people, it's folks that are doing planning, strategy stuff for maybe different functions, some out of finance, out of HR, out of sales, and we bring them together almost like a virtual team. And it's been very successful in almost making them part of our extended data program, giving them access to the tools, access to the data, the ability to do some of their own self-serve work. And what it did is it relieved a lot of the pressure from the data team directly, and they were empowered to go do their own thing. And a couple of things. One, they got access. They became much more familiar with the data. Two, they could only blame themselves if something wasn't getting done because they had access to do everything they needed. And three, it allowed our data teams to kind of do some more proactive work, right? As opposed to kind of what's the next future thing, as opposed to kind of run the business, keeping shit from falling over kind of thing, right? And so I do think that, folks that lead data programs should be, if you're not thinking about that, that's the kind of thing that, in my opinion, that good data programs need to find a way to kind of empower the users and the businesses to start getting into the data, become familiar with the data, and within some good guardrails. You got to get those guardrails established, but then allowing people to go in and do the data exploration, do the data discovery. And by the way, there's some great new technology out there that's not only helping people to, with no coding skills, no anything, being able to just use some of these visualization and kind of modern, I'd call them BI tools. They can see correlation. These technologies are even helping show correlation, like, hey, this is kind of an interesting data set that's kind of maybe gives you some insight into something you'd never seen before. That technology's there. And so I think it's a matter of making sure you get the guardrails set up and you get programs built like that so you can start introducing people to the data.
Yeah, and that's such an excellent point you brought in about, in particular, around collaboration, because guess what? Data discovery takes a long time. It's an ongoing process. Like the ground is shaking all the time. We certainly saw that with COVID, with human behavior turning sideways. I mean, a lot of the predictive models that were in place all the way up until March of 2020 went out the window when this pandemic hit. And I'll bring Gregor into this too. I think Eric made such a good point about getting buy-in, right? Getting skin in the game. You want all these team members to have their skin in the game. You want them to have access to data that is appropriate to them. And you want them helping you find anomalies, find signal. And a lot of times the anomalies, I believe, are either clearly signal or clearly noise, right? So anomalies are going to be something. It's something to look at. Okay, it was actually a mistake. Or what's going on here? That's a pretty weird thing. And as the old expression goes, many eyes make few the errors, right? It's actually many hands make light work, but many eyes make few the errors, and really help build a rich context for the organization to use. Gregor, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I agree with this, especially that finding answers to difficult problems usually requires a team. It's rarely done by a single person, and you need like a diverse team, right? So you basically need a lot of maybe not on the quantity side, but different angles of looking at the problem. I'll give you a quick example. We at Payability we basically have dependency on e-commerce business. So we analyze how e-commerce is doing, and during the pandemic, obviously there was a big boom, but everybody thought that this will stay forever, right? So the e-commerce is the best, and it's going to rule the world. Well, we noticed in around April 21, so about a year into pandemic, that some things are not going up anymore, and they're in fact going down. So we had, we basically couldn't explain. Nobody knew what's going on. So we had multiple people looking at this from very different angles, and they said like, well, there's something going on with the supply chain, because there's like people are short with inventory and they are not selling as much as they used to. And it's not that there's no demand, it's basically the product is not there. So that was very early signal for us, like pretty much like 3 months ahead of public discussion that there's a supply chain crisis. And wow. we could basically see this in the data very early. And like I said, like it was a new phenomenon that we would not know without the set of tools that we had and the set of data that we had.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And that's a perfect example of how you can use a variety of data sets to understand very significant developments in your marketplace. I mean, the supply chain conundrum is severe, right? And if you wait until you've got all these ships out in, on the coast of California, like 30, 40 of them just sitting out there waiting because they can't get to dock to get longshoremen to unload these ships, you probably waited a bit too long. Folks, wonderful show today. Big thanks to Eric Johnson from Momentive and Gregor Sewinski from Payability. You can see them both next week. Go to Airside.Live.